Morning everyone. I've just received my coffee, so I'm down at the park having a little play with this gem. Now, a lot of people actually don't know too much about these cars. They were originally released back in 1984, but because you've got all these new people getting into the hobby, there's a little bit of a lack of understanding when it comes to these vintage vehicles. Now, this is the re-release of the original from 1984. However, it's built basically exactly the same. And the reason they do that is because they were such a popular car. Now, the Grasshopper, the Hornet, the Super Hornet, everything around that sort of era is very sought after now, especially the original vintage ones. They go for quite a lot of money. I originally had a vintage one and I sold it, probably about 4 years ago, and it was the biggest mistake I ever made. I sold it for $100 with a couple of other cars, and it just, I regretted it ever since, because that was an original Grasshopper. Now, this particular Grasshopper, this was given to me by my wife as a birthday present, and this is what re-kicked me back into the RC world. It really opened my eyes to enjoying RC a lot more. Now, these aren't going to be your high performance cars. They were brought in as an affordable option for people to be able to take down to the racetrack and have some fun with family, all that sort of stuff. So they only retail for about 120 bucks. Now, if you want to spend $120 and actually get something that's really worthwhile, I highly recommend that you grab one of these before they are unavailable again, because what happens with Tamiya is that they release things for a certain amount of time and then they pull them, so they can make room for doing other projects or new cars or new re-releases of old cars. The thing is about these, even though they drive terribly, they only drive terribly in comparison to the stuff that's around today. Back in their day, these were fantastic. These, you would take them to the track. You can upgrade it with a 540 motor. These come stock standard with a little 380 motor that's inside there. And it is big enough, as you can see from the body cutout here, to allow putting in a 540 motor. You won't be able to put in a 550 because it'll actually hit the tire here. But, that is enough. The thing is, you can upgrade it. That's fine. The 380 motor is so good though, and it makes the car so light and nimble that it really does hoon along, and you can actually put a 2S on this, as long as you're running an ESC that has cut off, all that jazz. Which I can explain in the future. If you don't understand, just let me know in the comments and I can do a video on older ESCs, older digital ESCs, things like that. We can discuss going back to mechanical ESCs, which I'm actually not that familiar with. I do know about them, I understand how they work, but now we're going digital, why go back into that age? Personally, it's just not my thing. I like reliability. This is the only car that I've got that runs a 27 megahertz radio, and I'm actually running it on a Traxxas radio that was given to me by a friend. And I found that this is probably the most reliable when it comes to a AM radio, more than what was out there before. Now, what I'll say is, these drive just so fantastically. They bounce around like crazy. They really are. I'll just give it a quick squirt. So you see the rear end just bouncing around everywhere. If you drive a Hornet or a Super Hornet, they bounce around even more than that. And what I've found is that out of the buggies, this one is probably the nicest to drive. You can see there's a little bit of bounce in that front end as well. I can't tell if that's picking it up on camera. And I find that these, because they bounce around like that, it gives it a real comical sort of feel to it. Now, I know they've released the new Grasshopper comical edition. I absolutely love that, and honestly, that chassis, which is the same as the Wild Willy 2 chassis, they are fantastic. And even though they're a short wheelbase, they tend to stand up on their rear end a lot, which I'm guessing that's what they're built for. However, if you put a brushless system in those, they are awesome. and they really rip hard too. You just got to get the steering to your perfect level, get a really decent steering servo. But when it comes to something like this, you only need to go basic ESC, basic steering servo, because they're not built to go super duper fast. They're built to have fun with, they're built to take down to the park, and just put a smile on your face. And every single time that I drive this thing, it puts a smile on my face 100%. I am always happy when I'm driving this. The dogs love it. It doesn't scare the dogs at all, so they enjoy it as well. And yeah, I could run an entire battery through this and be super content. And then it just sits on the shelf for the next time that I want to take it out and have just a smile. When you're doing projects all the time that relate to, you know, building and things like that, it does tend to become quite taxing on your brain, because you're always thinking about, okay, how's that going to fit? What mount do I have to make? How can I make that bounce around this certain way so it reacts the way I want it to? When you have something like this, for $120, you can basically just put a battery in it, take it out, and instantly you're having fun. You're not competitive. If you do race them, and there are leagues that do race vintage Tamiyas, Kyosho's, things like that, they are incredibly fun because they're so weird with the way they drive and bounce around. They're unpredictable as hell. So when you do win races, it's super enjoyable. And I have taken this out with other vintage cars and raced them, and they're just a blast. You don't get that response that you get with the new cars. And unfortunately, cars are becoming so overly refined now, and this will be a mixed sort of crowd when I say this. They're too refined. You're losing out on the enjoyment of the toy factor of the cars. You know, a lot of people say, you know, toys, they are not. But they are toys, and they are made for enjoyment. And if you're overly refining them, what's the difference between sort of your RC crawler that's super over refined to actually having a real car? And I think, you know, you've got a real car that is scaled down. That's a really positive thing. I really enjoy that idea. But it becomes a little less enjoyable because you're losing that fun, silly side of RC. And I think some of you might understand this, some of you won't, but when you're driving a crawler, you become so intensely enwrapped in what's going on that it gets you frustrated sometimes. You can slip over while you're doing it, so that gets you a bit annoyed. But the thing is, when these original cars came out in the 80s, it's literally just going out and playing. You're out there to play, you're out there to have fun. And it wasn't about Instagram, it wasn't about YouTube or making cool videos of things going 20 meters in the air. This is sort of your back to basics. And what I'll wrap this up with is that if you're going to really appreciate RC and you only have new cars, I highly recommend you start looking into some older vintage cars, things like the Grasshopper, things like your Kyosho's. I can't think of the exact sub-brands, like I think it's the Sandmaster, things like that, because it will get you to understand where it all came from, the origin of RC. When you really break it down to the origin of RC, you start to super appreciate what's out right now. And you're less likely to want the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. It's about making something that's old like this drive even better. You know, whether you want to upgrade the shocks, whether you want to put a bigger motor in, balance out the weight distribution, things like that. Have a think about it. Look into vintage RC because I really recommend it. And yeah, have a good week, guys.